In 3 minutes, I'm going to set this paper down and just tell stories based on some pictures. And that's going to be the whole thing. But whenever I'm speaking about Our Lady, I always want to contextualize it a little bit. And so this is the part where I read a little bit. Just remember, let's get a few things straight. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, fully human and divine, is the Redeemer of the world. Jesus is the final end of all devotion to Our Lady. She is a mere human. He is God and human. I don't always know who's in the audience. I think Catholics should know that. But I want to say that explicitly because this is going to be heavy on the Blessed Virgin Mary tonight. Catholics do not worship Mary like we worship the Blessed Trinity, but we love her and venerate her like no human being before or since. As Jesus' mother, she was physically connected to Jesus. If you think about her or him, he nursed at her breast. She passed on her DNA to him. And for 30 years, he was obedient and he responded to her. And we see it all over script. Well, not all over, the few mentions of her in Scripture. When they found him in the temple, at the wedding of Cana, these different things. Jesus loved his mom. In fact, his first miracle was at her direction. Then at the end of his life, while hanging on the cross, who was there? 11 of the 12 apostles were too scared. Easy for us to call them cowards, but it was pretty horrible what was going on. But who was there? His mom at the foot of the cross. So she is unique in a special way. The angel Gabriel appeared to her and greeted her with respect. An angel greeted her with respect. Hail Mary. Then the angel stated that Mary was different than everyone else, full of grace. If you're like, I would love to be full of grace. Do I allow it? Am I open to it? Do I block it? She was full of grace, and the Lord is with thee. And then when she went to see her cousin Elizabeth, Elizabeth said, "Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb." So Mary is special because God made her special, and God declared her to be special, and to deny that Mary is not somehow preeminent in the story of salvation or is not special is to deny Scripture itself. And my final written word, we never have to worry about loving her too much. She is absolutely inseparable from Christ. Love of Mary is directed to love of Jesus. And frankly, we could probably never love her as Jesus loved her. So that's the beginning. Today is October 7th, the Feast of the Holy Rosary. Location, somewhere off the coast of the Greek islands in October of 1571. Here's what was going on. The Turkish army, in this case, not only the army, but the navy, was invading Europe. They badly outnumbered the Christian defense. The Turks at the time would come in, and they were brutal on the people they conquered. And part of the brutality was they did not have any notion of freedom of religion. You either denied your faith or you died. And so they were on the cusp, and Europe were on their heels. Didn't have enough ships, didn't have enough troops, didn't have whatever. Pope St. Pius V saw the fleet coming, and he put the word out throughout Europe. Everyone, get down on your knees and pray the rosary. And in one of the great upsets in military history, the Christian Armada repelled the Turks and basically saved the free practice of Christianity in Europe, which was really the free, like Europe hadn't really gone out and evangelized a lot of the rest of the world yet. And so nobody can explain it. Well, I mean, people will try to rationalize. But it was a continent of people on their knees praying the rosary, saved Christianity at that point. All right, now I would like to jump ahead 400 and some years to the Klaska House on Victoria Drive in Elkhart, Indiana in 1974. In 1974, there was a little boy here named Bobby Klaska. And he had a really good dad. And his dad worked hard and he wasn't around a lot, but he loved all his kids. And in 1974, there was probably only 8 or 9 of us. And there ended up being 13. And by the way, they all went to Marian High School. Well, when I was a boy, I can remember in my mom and dad's bedroom, there was an icon of Our Lady of Perpetual Help. And my dad, in the mornings, would get up and do push-ups. And then, like, if we heard him milling about, we would go and, like, get on his back. And he would do push-ups with us on his back. And, I mean, if you know my dad, he's sort of like a man's man, you know, and he's trying to, before it was cool to stay in shape, like he was trying to do push-ups and do whatever. And one morning, I looked up at the icon, and I said, Dad, what's that? And he said, well, it's Our Lady of Perpetual Help. And I said, that's ugly. And as a little boy, like this Eastern icon just did not look attractive to me. And my dad picked me up and brought me over to the picture and said, I'll never forget, Bobby, this is the most beautiful woman in the world. And I said, more beautiful than Mom? And he said, yes. And that made a huge impression on me back in the day. Do you like the pants? All right, let me jump ahead to 1986. That same little boy, Bobby Klaska, had just graduated from here, and I was a freshman at the University of Notre Dame. And one day, I was walking back from South Dining Hall. I lived out in a dorm Carroll Hall that was way out, away from everybody. And we would always meet left in South Dining Hall. You would take a left and then a left, and that's where our tables were. And we would always sit together, and then, when we got done eating, we would walk back together. So we're walking back in a group, and one of the guys I really liked and looked up to, who was a sophomore, peeled off and was going away. I was like, "Where are you going?" He was like, "Come with me." So we peeled off, and we walked over to the grotto. And here's a guy just a year older than me, who I thought was kind of funny, smart, whatever, kind of aspired to be as cool as he was. And I was a freshman. I'm still finding myself. His name was Greg Andres. And he said, "Last year I realized I'm only going to be here for 4 years. I visit the grotto every day. And I go and I just say a prayer, and then I go back." And he invited me to come with him. And so I did. And I can't say that I did every single day, but just about every day of the rest of my Notre Dame career, I visited the grotto because he showed me the way. Now, 30 years later, we're sitting on our family breakfast on a Sunday morning, and we have 7 children in a 100-year-old house, and 1 bathroom upstairs, because they didn't build bathrooms downstairs 100 years ago or 105 years ago. And somehow we had not effectively coordinated the shower schedule. So not everyone was going to get showered. It was time to go. And so I said, "Go ahead without me. Instead of the 11 o'clock at St. Matt's, I'll go to the 11:45 at the Basilica at Notre Dame, which is just a 15, 20-minute walk from our house." So I go there alone. Actually, I drove the car, I parked, I went in. It was a snowy day. And, I felt bad that I didn't go to Mass with my family. And I felt like, had I gotten up earlier, I could have circumvented this whole log jam. It really, at this point, it's on the parents because we didn't coordinate, and I felt like I didn't coordinate. But I stayed afterwards, and I went to the Lady Chapel, and I prayed, and I fell asleep for a little bit, and then I got up, and I was walking back to my car. And as I was walking back to my car, I saw a young man kneeling at the grotto of Our Lady of Lourdes. And you know how there's different kinds of snow? This was big, wet snowflakes. And they were piling on top of him, and he was completely immobile. And as I'm walking by, I had no intention. I'm walking down, these steps right here, and then you walk by and you go out. I had no intention of stopping. I had prayed enough, and I slept in the Basilica. But I saw that, and it struck me. There was something about the image of this kid praying intently. And so I went to take a picture, and then I was like, no, I need to get the spire in the background. So I kind of shifted over, and I took another picture from the proper angle. And as soon as I took that picture, my cell phone shut down. It was not really that cold out. My cell phone was in the 40% of battery. I have no explanation for why my cell phone shut down. I took the picture, it shut down, I left, I went to the car, I came home, I watched NFL games, I did my Sunday thing, whatever. And then later that night, because I had not upgraded my cell phone, I had to clear out memory. I used to have to do that before I got the big, I had to clear out pictures. And I go through and I look at that and I say, what in the heck? And I didn't know what had happened and I hadn't seen anything. But obviously you can see something right here, right over the young man. And I was taken aback. And as I looked at it more and more, it sort of looked like an image of Our Lady and how it played with the stones, almost like Our Lady holding a baby. And so I often post to social media, like I probably posted 100 photos of the grotto on social media, okay? So I was just like, well, I'm gonna put this up. And I texted a few of my Notre Dame buddies and I went to bed. And I got up the next morning and it was blowing up. And people were looking at this and they were making comments. And then I'm getting texts from my college buddies and they're saying, I'm crying looking at this photo. And I was completely unaware of anything going on when I took the photo. What I think happened, I think it's pretty clear. There was a snowflake that fell in front of my camera at the exact moment that I took the picture. And somehow, as it interfaced with the rocks behind it, it sort of looked like Our Lady. But the reaction on social media and from my texts and stuff was disproportionate to just like a coincidence. Like people were having a strong reaction, wanting to talk to me, wanting to discuss this. Now, I admit, like, can you explain this scientifically? Yes. A snowflake fell in front of my camera. It happens, right? And it played in such a way, it's like when you're a kid and you're looking at clouds and you can see faces in the clouds. But you think about this. You're telling me that I shifted around and that snowflake was coming from 500, 800, 1,000 feet above. That at the precise millisecond that the camera shutter opened and closed, it would line up directly over this young man and then create an image that vaguely suggests a woman holding a child. It's very difficult to ascribe that to coincidence. So now it's out on social media. And then a 1981 graduate of Marian High School, Mike Murray, lives out in Arizona, in rural Arizona, and kind of like on land that has wild horses, and he's kind of a guy that loves nature and stuff, but he loves prayer. He loves his Catholic faith. He took this photo and outlined the image of Our Lady and just darkened the back. I said, Mike, what did you do to this? He said, look, this was 5 minutes. I outlined the snowflake and darkened the background. That's all I did. And now this image is looking more and more like Our Lady. Well, the thing blew up. I estimate that 1 million people or more have seen this. I had hundreds and hundreds of shares on Facebook, and then I would hit the share and somebody else would post it, and the derivative shares were hundreds of shares. Then I wrote it up and put it into a blog post and explained the whole situation. And I got over 250,000 hits, according to the analytics, in like 2 months of having this up. So it went all over the place. What did I do? I felt like Forrest Gump. Like, I just took a picture, put it up, and Our Lady did that. All right. Hold that thought. We will come back to it. Nigeria, 2014. My neighbor is a Nigerian priest. And we talk about Nigeria all the time. And he just vaguely made reference to something that happened in Nigeria. And it got me like Googling on the internet. Like, what are you talking about? In northern Nigeria, there is a horrible, horrible terrorist group named Boko Haram. In 2014, well, first of all, they behead Christians, okay? They kidnapped 200 Christian girls, and they do unspeakable things to these girls. And it's like lawlessness up there. The government can't control them. It's out of control. So in December of 2014, this bishop, Oliver Dome, I don't know how to say it, was praying in his diocese. This is where these horrible things were happening. Literally, this guy was getting up every day, not only worried about his own life, but worried about the lives of, like, if you come to the cathedral and go to Mass, you are taking your life in your own hands because of Boko Haram. So what does he do? He does what a good bishop ought to do. He goes before the Blessed Sacrament in Eucharistic adoration, and he's praying. And you can Google this, and you can listen to his own words. Jesus appears to him as he's praying, and Jesus is holding a sword. And he looks the bishop in the eye and walks toward him and hands him the sword and says 3 times, Boko Haram is gone. Boko Haram is gone. Boko Haram is gone. And I would encourage you to Google that sometime and listen to what he said. When he received the sword in this vision, it turned into a rosary. And he was holding a rosary. So he declared in his diocese, everyone was going to pray the rosary for the defeat and eradication of Boko Haram. Within 2 years, most of the 200 girls had been recovered or released, and 96% of the diocese, I don't know how they calculate that, but this is what it says, was free of Boko Haram. They were driven out. And it was the rosary. All right. Now, those of you who know me know that I have a pub in my backyard. And it's a true public house. We do not try to overemphasize drinking, although beer is part of it. I also run prayer groups. And every night, my family will live stream on Facebook a rosary. I know you guys come. And we started that during COVID in 2020, the live streaming, and we do it still to today. In the peak of COVID, we were probably getting 500 people overnight. Like, we would do it live, and 50, 60, 70 people would come, and then 400, 500, 600 people would pray along with us. Now it's down. We get about 40, 50 people, but we only get a couple hundred overnight. But you will, if you go to our live stream rosary, you'll see this image of Our Lady. And this image of Our Lady has its own story that is incredible. So now I want to take you to Kalamazoo, Michigan in 1987. There is a woman in Kalamazoo named Henryka Turnier. She's a Polish immigrant. She had a 13-year-old son who died tragically in 1987. And she was devastated. In her grief, she turned to Our Lady for consolation. And she was given, the way she describes it was like imprinted upon her heart and mind was an image of Our Lady that she felt called to promulgate and to spread. There was one problem. She wasn't an artist, and she didn't know how to make this image materialize. So she would drive to Saugatuck, which is sort of an art colony on the coast of Michigan, on Lake Michigan, and she would try to find artists. And she talked to family and friends. 2 or 3 times, she commissioned an artist and then tried to describe what the artist was supposed to paint. And every time, the project never even got off the ground. They just backed out. It didn't happen. So for 10 years, she carried this grief around and this sense that Our Lady wanted to manifest herself, but she hadn't found the outlet. 10 years later, after her most recent artist fell through, she said, screw it, I'm painting it myself. This is a woman who has never taken an art lesson, didn't know anything about painting. She went to a supply store, she bought paints, and it took her 650 hours of work to paint this painting. She said she stopped, she started, and then she was trying to figure out, like when she makes a mistake, how do you erase a mistake when you're dealing in oil? And she discovered, she's Polish, and I grew up with a Polish mom. Polish moms are very clean. They clean everything. Everything is orderly. Everything's like that. So I am sure her house is very clean and orderly. She found a cleaning agent that could act as sort of an eraser on her mistakes. And she went to the art store and was talking about this, and they were like, we never heard of that, but it sounds great, and I forget what kind of cleaning agent it was. While she was doing this, she felt like she had 2 angelic visitors. When she would be alone at night painting, these 2 sort of figures that she says, I'm just telling you what she says, okay? She says they kind of look like Renaissance artists, Italians, or whatever, and they would sort of like argue with each other, but they would encourage her and guide her. Okay, that's what she says. One day, after over 650 hours, she got to this. She looked at it. She said, I'm done. She gave away her paints. She's not an artist. She doesn't do any more. And then she started sending it out. And she got the same reaction from people that I got from my photo of the grotto. People would like tear up. They would say, it's so tender. It's not really an icon, but it's not really like it's not typical. It's like a little different, and it's a blend of traditional and modern. It's whatever. She took out a second mortgage on her house and has distributed over 220,000 prayer cards like this. And she calls it Ave Maria. And she just gives them out to bring people comfort. And that is what came from the pain of the loss of her son. Well, so February of 2017, a month or two after I took the photo, I was inundated with social media correspondence. I was responding to so many inquiries about the picture I had posted that I got like wrist injuries, and I had to step away from the computer for days to let them heal. 2 or 3, 4 nights, I stayed up all night trying to reply, because when people, the depth of their caring and being moved by Our Lady, I'm like, I can't just be like, I'm glad you found it good, all the best, like I had to engage them. And so one night I get something, and this woman who I didn't know, but I knew her husband, she was actually married to a guy I went to school with, said, I saw your picture and it matches the picture in our house. Like, which one came first? And, like, did you have the painting commissioned to match the picture? And I said, no. But then we started doing sort of side-by-side comparisons. And it does look like a similar structure. She had not signed any of these, and we didn't even know who the artist was. We just knew now that there was a picture out there, and then we dug a little deeper, and if you look at the photo, and the one on the far right is the original photo, then this is the one that Mike Murray enhanced, and then this is her painting. I find the further away you stand, the more it looks similar. The closer up you get, it's like, it gets kind of pixelated. So sometime, step back and look at it, and the further back you look, the more it looks like this. Well, I didn't even know the story of this woman, and then I start searching, and I'm pretty good at stalking people and finding information on the internet. And I found her. Well, first we got a name. Somebody finally said, I got one, and it says a name. And then I found her, and she was in Kalamazoo. So I drove up to Kalamazoo, and I met her at a Panera's. And we spent several hours together in this amazing I don't know, celebration of Our Lady. That's all I can tell you. All right. This was not the first time a photo had caused this kind of stir. Go back to my mom and dad's house, which I refer to as Klaska HQ, in 1991. My mom and dad were making pilgrimages to Medjugorje, Yugoslavia. And at one pilgrimage, my father had, well, this got them back into their faith. They were never away. We always went to Sunday Mass. My dad had a picture of Our Lady of Perpetual Help. But I mean, this took their faith to the next level, these pilgrimages. He was praying one day, and my dad likes to fish. And he told me later, you know, you can't pray 24/7. So I just found a guy who had a fishing pole, and we were like, let's go down. There's these waterfalls near Medjugorje, and let's go fishing. So they went fishing in the waterfall and didn't catch anything. And before he left, he pulled out his camera. This was before cell phones. And he took a picture of the waterfall. Now, the original photo that my dad took is right here. And then gradually I have superimposed this image, which is Our Lady of Medjugorje. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. And we had this picture in our house for months. My little sister Lisa, who just texted me, she was meant to come tonight because she has kids at Marian High School right now, was just going through the pictures, and she's like, what's that? That looks like Our Lady of Medjugorje. And Lisa had been profoundly affected. Course of her life changed, has been an RCIA director for 30 years now, working in the diocese, all getting her juice from her experience here. And this picture in 1991 went as viral as a picture could go in 1991. We didn't have social media, we didn't have whatever, it was in magazines. My parents were printing hundreds of copies, were giving them out. People were coming to the house out of nowhere saying, we want to see this picture, whatever. What I find interesting, it's the exact same thing. It's completely explainable by science, right? It's water. The water's falling. You can see images. If you take 100 pictures, you could look at it and find a dog or a cat or whatever. But there was no intention to capture anything. It was just the sincere thing and the context that this is 7 or 8 miles from, this is the iconic photo of Our Lady of Medjugorje, or not photo, but painting. And it corresponds to the waterfall. Well, when I saw that photo in 1991, I had just graduated from college, and I got to tell you, it pierced my heart. It's all about context. Like, what else is going on that makes that coincidence so non-coincidental? All right. So now I'd like to take you back a year or two to my senior year at Notre Dame. And I include this slide just to tell you, 80s nostalgia. Carl and I went to school together. But here's a bunch of photos of college Bobby Klaska in late 1980s, okay? I was not an overly pious kid. I was doing what at school seemed to be normal things with normal people. I wasn't especially wild or anything, but I was kind of just a dude. I fell in love. This guy here just fell in love with this girl. And her uncle was a theologian in the theology department. And my entire senior year, I dated her. Actually started my junior year, then over the summer, then senior year. In the second semester of my senior year, she studied in London. And now we've been dating a year or more, and I was a pretty serious kid. And I'm thinking, like, I'm not just wasting time, I'm thinking, I'm zeroing in, you know, like the one. She goes to London, and in those days, there was no instantaneous communication. A long distance phone call was $5 a minute. And there was like a lag. You couldn't even have a conversation because there was like a 4-second lag between whatever. So I made bootleg t-shirts and I worked 2 jobs and I hustled around and I made enough money to go and visit her on spring break in the spring of 1990. We were in London. We had a wonderful week. The last night I was there, we were in Hyde Park. We were talking about our future, and we talked about getting married. And she brought it up, and I had been thinking it, but I was like, no doubt. Get up the next morning, get on a plane, and I wasn't going to see her again for 2 or 3 months. And that meant basically I was out of contact with her because you just had no way to stay in contact. She was going to finish her semester, then travel around Europe, then come back in June. Well, I came back and I went to Fox Jewelers and started looking at rings. And my brother-in-law, Dave Thomas, who some of you know was like advising me on engagement rings and whatnot. And then she was scheduled to come home from her trip. And she lived in Toledo. And I wanted to be the first person she saw when she landed at O'Hare. So I drove to O'Hare just to be with her for like an hour layover, just so I could see her. And then I was just gonna drive home and let her get on her flight to Toledo. So I drive there, I have flowers for her, I'm so fired up, I'm so happy. And she gets off the plane and she's surprised to see me. And it wasn't a good surprise. So after that night in Hyde Park, we separated and I went back to the States. I went in one direction mentally and emotionally. She went in the exact opposite direction. Like by talking about it and considering it or whatever, and then having time to mull it over, she was like, nah, this isn't right. But I had, in essence, like surprised her, and she was on the spot, and you could just see it on her face that like something was wrong. So it was a disastrous trip. And I'll never forget, she got on the plane, and I'm walking through O'Hare, and I'm going back to my car, and it's like one of those crappy, rainy Chicago days, and like trying to get out of O'Hare, and there's traffic. And I'm so depressed, like, what just happened? What just happened? Well, we had said she was going to come and visit my family because we integrated, like we were serious enough that we knew each other's siblings, and we wanted to. And when she got back to Toledo and I got back there that night, she was like, she clearly did not want to come to Elkhart and visit. And then I knew it's over. So she proposed that I come to Toledo. And then I knew, okay, she's got to be on her home court so she can break up with me. And I was blindsided. And I know this sounds bad, and I know it sounds disproportionate, but if I'm to be honest, it was such a severe blow. And I had made her a god in my life. And the removal of that god honestly made me suicidal. And I got off the phone, and with 12 brothers and sisters in our house, there was always somebody up. The last people would go to bed at 1 or 2 in the morning. The first people would get up at 4 or 5 in the morning. There was a small window where nobody was up in the house. This is like 11 or 12 at night. And I get off the phone, and remember, you didn't just walk around anywhere. It was tethered to the wall, right? So I get off the phone, and I'm walking around. The house is dark, and nobody's around. And the loneliness I felt, and the desperation, and the loss, and I knew what was coming. And I walked around like my life was over. And I don't want to be melodramatic about it, but I was so humiliated, so embarrassed, so disappointed because I thought she was the one, that I started going through scenarios of how I could kill myself and make it look like an accident. Because I didn't want to hurt my family, but I didn't want to live. And I won't go into the detail of several different scenarios where I could fake an accidental death and be done with it. My body literally ached. I was so hurting. And I went up to bed, and the next day I was to drive to Toledo so this deed would be done. And I got into my bed, and I just sobbed. I mean, I sobbed. I cried in a way that I've never cried before or since. And then this thought turned into my head that on the other side of the wall was my dad's picture of Our Lady of Perpetual Help. It was a new house, but it was the same picture. And I laid in bed, and I wasn't particularly faithful at the time. And I said, Mary, you're Our Lady of Perpetual Help. Save this. Save me. Save this relationship. And I started to beg, and I got like this jolting message. And she said no. And I'm like, you're Our Lady of Perpetual Help. And you said no? And then it was weird. I don't know how to communicate it, but it was like, try again. And I was like, okay. If it's over, it's over. Will you just take the pain away? Just take the pain. And I looked at myself as like a little boy crying, tugging on my mom's skirt, saying, Mama, I'm hurting. Take the pain. And then I fell asleep. And I don't know if it was 15 minutes or 3 hours later, I was complete darkness in my room. And I never slept on my back, and I shot up in my bed. And I'm up, and I'm looking around. And she spoke to me. And she, like, I don't know how to describe it. I didn't hear it with my ears, But it wasn't a thought, like an imaginary thought. It was a voice. But it wasn't through my ears. And I felt her presence. And she said, "Don't worry, my child. Everything's going to be all right." And then I'm like, what just happened? And then in the most tender voice, she repeated the second part. She said, "Everything's going to be all right." And at that moment, I began to feel the pain drain out of me. And I remember it drained out of my head, down through my neck, through my chest. And it probably took like a minute. It was like slowly draining out. And I remember thinking, my gut still hurts, but my head is clear. And it went out, and it went out to my knees and to my toes. And I felt completely pain-free. And then I didn't know what to do, and I went back to sleep. I got up the next morning. I was not excited to go to Toledo, but I went. I was peaceful. It all played out exactly as I thought. She told me her reasons, whatever. Now, I will say this. When she was telling me she was breaking up with me after we had just talked, like our last big conversation was how we're going to get married and how she loved me so much, there was that part of me that would deliberately try to make her feel guilty, or like try to save it, or like, "You're going to break up with me? Well, I'm going to kind of hurt you right now." And I just didn't do any of that. I just said, "Okay, I think I still love you, but I had this thing happen last night." I told her, and I said, "Thank you, it's been great," and I left. And her mom stopped me. Her mom had went and walked the dog to give us time together, and her mom made me get out of the car, and we cried. And then I got on the toll road, and I went to the first rest stop, and I sat there and I sobbed, and then I fell asleep. Then I got up, I drove home, and I never cried again, and I never felt pain about it again. And I got home that night, and my dad and some of my family were sitting on the back patio, and they're like, "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in Toledo." I said, "Well, let me go get a beer." And we sat down, and I didn't really tell him what had happened in my bedroom until a few weeks later. Now, this is unbelievable. My dad pulls me aside and says, "Bobby, what happened to you? Like, you're acting different," because I was peaceful. I was walking around singing the Bob Marley song, "Don't worry about a thing, 'cause every little thing's gonna be all right." Like, I sang that and played it all summer. And I told my dad what happened, and my dad went blank. My dad. And he said, "I'll be right back." He goes up and he keeps a journal next to his bed. And about 8 or 9 or 10 months before that, he showed me in his journal. He was awakened in the middle of the night. And Our Lady said to him, "Don't worry, my son. I will take care of you." And we're like, "You can't make this up." Like, my dad had the exact same experience on the other side of the wall, and we didn't even know it. To this day, I'm still running on that juice. Scottsdale, Arizona, 1993. I end up out there. It's another big, long story. And Our Lady leads me to Margie. And it doesn't look like it, but guess where this picture was taken? The waterfall in Medjugorje. We went there as part of our honeymoon. Everything's going to be all right. So then we moved to Steubenville, Ohio. We were in Bristol, and now we're in South Bend. And let me tell you, life has been challenging. Okay? Margie got super sick, bedridden for most of her pregnancies 5 times. At least the first trimester, couldn't get out of bed. I've had cancer 3 times, 2 stem cell transplants. For 18 out of our 25 years of marriage, I'm chronically ill. I've had over 30 surgeries. I've had a heart attack. I have stents in my heart. And yet, everything's okay. And if you know me, you know I haven't gotten overly down. And people say, well, you're just a positive person. No, it's Our Lady. Like, Our Lady helps me. And I can't explain it either, because we've had a hard marriage. We've had a hard time. Well, what I've come to realize was that at first, when I would think about everything's going to be all right, don't worry, my child, everything's going to be all right, I thought it meant in that situation with my girlfriend. Then I moved out to Scottsdale, and I'm discerning it through, and I realized she didn't say everything's going to be all right with this. She said everything's going to be all right. So I took that as saying this: I'm going to be devoted to Our Lady. I'm going to go to Mass every day. I'm going to go to Eucharistic adoration. I'm going to aspire to the closest relationship with God that I can have. And as long as I try, she's going to take care of me. And that means right now, like, I'm freaking out about my kids and what's going to happen in the world and everything. And the thing that I keep coming back to is everything's going to be all right. But then I moved out to Scottsdale and I started teaching at a high school. And it was a harsh thing. I was 5-6 years older than the seniors I was teaching. And it was a Jesuit high school. It was great. They were awesome. I loved the place. But let's just say the local, abortion doctor felt comfortable sending his son to the high school because he just didn't really see, that they were going to say anything against that. And he was in my class. And then I realized a third level of this message is that when I was talking to people individually, I would feel like this prompt, and literally in my heart. And all I would say is, don't worry, everything's going to be all right. I wouldn't even tell them the story. And people would start crying. It was like this power or something. And when I was prompted, I would just say it. And it meant a lot to a lot of people. So it's not just for me. All right, let's jump back. I'm almost done. To France in the 18th century. St. Louis de Montfort. Mary is the safest, easiest, shortest, and most perfect way of approaching Jesus. And I've read St. Louis de Montfort multiple times. I was always a little worried about it, and then I saw my hero, John Paul II, was really into him. And so I would read Pope John Paul's stuff, and I would read Mary's stuff. It is my experience in my life that this is true. And then in 1917, in Fatima, Portugal, in some of the most dramatic, incontrovertible supernatural things happening, with the sun spinning and everybody drying off after a rainstorm or whatever, Our Lady comes to these peasant people, these peasant kids, over the course of 6 months, and what does she say? Pray the rosary every day in order to obtain peace for the world. There is no problem, I tell you, no matter how difficult it is, that we cannot resolve by the prayer of the Holy Rosary. So 4 years ago, I found a way. I took my sons to Fatima. And it was a boondoggle off of another trip. But I felt her presence in Fatima in a profound way. The now deceased chief exorcist of Rome, Father Gabriel Amorth, who has written these great books on exorcism, says, every Hail Mary is like the blow on my head. If Christians knew how powerful the rosary was, it would be my end. And so now I take you to 2021, in your house, in your life. Can you spare 20 minutes to pray the rosary every day? If you do, it'll change your life. In Fatima, she asked to pray the rosary every day. In Medjugorje, she said pray the whole rosary every day. I pray all 20 mysteries of the rosary every day. I can't not. I would be an idiot. Knowing what I've known and been given what I've been given, I have to. And so I leave it at that. My challenge to you, if you're not already close to Our Lady, seek Our Lady. She will help you. And the rosary will help you when you feel helpless. All right, that's it. And